Hi, welcome back to my channel. I made a couple of notes because I tried to make a video yesterday and it just kind of was a bit like half-hearted, just not really something I needed to be uploading because I just repeated a lot of stuff, and I feel like in this video I might repeat a couple of things, but there's also added stuff in it where, I don't know, I wasn't quite feeling it. It wasn't quite to the standard that I was willing to upload. But hello, I've been away for, usually I upload like more frequently than this, and I've been away for a little bit longer, not only like 3 more days, so I probably hasn't bothered many people, but I am hoping to still consistently upload, so just to put that out there. But this video is about how I feel like we have gone through a lot of astrological changes. We've also recently gone through this change in Venus. I'm not going to go on about astrology throughout the whole thing, but we have gone through this like Venus retrograde, which has, Venus is all about love basically, and it's helped me observe a lot of stuff about love that and like other people, I suppose, observe stuff about love that you might realise what love is to you, how some people love, because the fact is people love in different ways, and it's not to say that you need to receive everyone's love. You know, if they have personality disorder traits, they are unable to love in a way that might suit you. For example, it's not the way they're able or programmed to love. It's a deficit in their personality and their mind that renders them incapable of receiving love in perhaps a way that you might wish to be loved. For example, if you're like empathic, or you maybe don't have that personality trait. Like, obviously I'm not perfect, I have borderline personality traits, I'm sure, not that I'm diagnosed. I'm a massive empath. Apparently it's very common for like empaths to have borderline traits, so that's me. So maybe my level of love wouldn't suit a lot of other people because I can have fears of rejection and things like that, so that's like me. But you know, and it's about bearing that in mind as well. But you've always got to put yourself first, especially in this new astrological era, like where putting yourself first is obviously going to be like the most important part of like living, and in Aquarius that's kind of like how it goes. Also coming up, just to finish off the astrology thing, I'm not going to go on about astrology the whole thing, but we've also got like Chiron in Aries apparently, which Chiron is like the healing planet. I feel like I'm encountering a lot of healing recently, and I've put this down to Chiron being in Aries. Chiron is the healing asteroid. I'll leave it there. If you've been experiencing any healing recently, that might be why. And I think, yeah, let's just leave astrology now because I don't want to go too far in astrology. But we are at a lot of change in this time, I find, and Aries is in Aries as well. The Aries, ERIS asteroid is also in Aries, which makes us all come into our own in our own way, be that for the good or the bad. And it also, I feel like, is highlighting a lot of wounds that would need to be healed within each of us, because that's kind of what I'm going to be talking about, sort of healing and stuff as well, and controlling what you can control. And sometimes you outgrow blessings of the past. I've gotten a couple of notes, so I'm just gonna like chuck some of the stuff, but finding and prioritizing mutual respect in relationships as well is something that I've kind of been working on, because regardless of whether I feel like it's just so important in relationships. I did a video recently on healthy relationships. I'm not going to go in on that. But I think the Venus retrograde has really highlighted what people are capable of in relationships and what they're not capable of. You know, so it's about prioritizing yourself and meeting your own needs, and then the right people be attracted to you. I find if you are like, you know, it's an unequally yoked biblically relationship. If you're kind of not standing up for your will of choice and your God-given will of choice, you know, and your free will, it's so tricky when you're around people that are, you know, got disorders and stuff, or disorder traits, narcissism, blah blah blah. But you know, when all this happens, I think regardless, it's just so important to be in touch with like your choices, your, you know, will of choice, your rights as an autonomous human being, because so many toxic people don't want you to be autonomous. They kind of want you to be like interlinked in their web of, you know, people that they can abuse and blah blah blah. I've already talked about a lot of things to do with toxic people. But you know, when it's about navigating those situations, and that's not really kind of the video that I'm doing, even though it's part of it. Expressing your emotions in terms of healing from these situations, given we are in this Chiron astrological situation at the moment, as I said, Chiron in Aries. Expressing emotion has been something that's been really healing for me, because they say if you store hatred in your heart, it actually has much more damage to you than the person that caused it, and often we're not in the place to process that for whatever reason. It can be repressed, which is extremely unhealthy, but it's the sad fact of a lot of us, you know. And EMT is actually a really great way that I've learned how to do it really easily. It's just where I think it's like, you can Google the picture of where it tells you how to tap. It's EMT tapping, so it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I think it's that, and sometimes there's wrists included, and you say the emotion you want to release, like fear, and it just kind of flows away from your mind. I know this wants to do with your wrist, and sometimes you have to tap your head, so I think there's a couple of different ways you can do it, but it actually helps you connect to some sort of system in your body which is connected to emotion, because our body's like, you know, spirit, mind, whatever, it's all very connected, and I really love somatic connection, because I find that that's really something that I can connect to quite well. So in terms of other things and releasing past trauma and emotion and stuff, I've kept an anger journal recently, of things that have sort of triggered me, and I think in my last video I tried to kind of talk through this, but I think there was just very simply a column expressing what the anger was, the duration of the anger, the intensity of the anger rated from 1 to 4, each of those rated from 1 to 4, and then the last column was how you dealt with it, and the column after that, I believe, was added later. But I think you can do a lot of like that's not, but keeping an anger journal and how you can react to things in a better way can just journaling, I think in general, is just really 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 beneficial for processing your thoughts, because when you're not, you know, saying them to another person, they can often make sense in your own head, but it's not until you get them out and rationalize them on paper often that things start to become dispelled, and often there can be a lot of like truth in it, but it doesn't mean that you have to live in that lens of trauma forever. And often what I found is you can have emotion and internalize emotion from situations and other people that mean that you integrate those emotions and traumas into your own personality, and that's really really unhealthy over time. Like, it's so normal though, because of the whole, I've talked about this before, this whole fawning response and the whole, you know, Stockholm syndrome situation where, you know, if you come across an abuser or someone that's kind of that way inclined, you will sort of you can and probably might fall into this sort of Stockholm syndrome situation where you're kind of fawning along with the abuse on some level, and it's the mind's response to protect the self and not sort of get overly emotionally, you know, dragged down to that level, and kind of protect you from, you know, conflict. So that's kind of where that comes from, but at the same time, setting boundaries is so important when coming from this, because I think lockdown has really put a lot of that stuff in perspective for me, in terms of like going to church for me has helped me, I don't know, just find grace from people in the past that have kind of triggered me in a lot of ways, but at the same time it's not for you to take on another person's toxic personality unless that's something you choose to do. you know, for whatever reason, if it's like a family member that you're choosing to tolerate in whatever capacity that suits you, that's healthy for you. I think the goal should always be a healthy, balanced self. And you know, it can just interfere with boundaries, and creating them when you are in this Stockholm syndrome loop, which is really common to get into. And I think the more you can find distance, and even if you can't find a great amount of distance, you can still find healing and clarity in situations that help you reprogram the mind to actually be able to overcome those sort of situations, build boundaries, and sort of distance yourself more so than maybe you have felt able to in the past due to various situations that can arise in life. And the fact is, I believe that you do encounter cycles again and again until you overcome them. You do encounter narcissists, psychopaths, borderlines, and I have borderline traits, as I said, but you know, in all capacities. But something that I've found really interesting to acknowledge recently is they don't come in all of this. They don't come in the same box. In a lot of capacities, toxic people, you can come across some borderline personality people that are what they call petulant, which is they are unstable and more volatile in the way they kind of react to situations. There's also types of borderlines which are self-destructive, where maybe that's the way they think. You come across narcissists that are grandiose, covert, you know, very grandiose, or they're very quiet and go about it in more of a, you know, snakier way, if you like. And you get a lot of variations of toxic people, which is kind of very interesting for me and freeing in some ways, because it shows that just because you've been abused by one person, just as different people will come into your life, and maybe someone very similar might come into your life, especially if you're programmed to that abuse and from a law of attraction level you somehow are able to let that sort of a person back into your atmosphere because you haven't healed from it fully. But when that does happen, you also notice that, because it takes the power away to a massive extent in my mind of toxic people, because you're not going to encounter that very person again if you cut them off, you know, and that's something freeing. So if someone has physically like attacked you, or you know, someone has really just put a lot of their own issues on you for whatever reason, if they're like self-destructive, narcissists will inevitably ruin their relationships, and that's not something that you need to take accountability for. For example, if that's happened, you might come across someone that, for example, is like me, might be empathic and have borderline traits, and won't necessarily destroy relationships through narcissistic means, but you know, we all have our like downsides, and I think it's just about selecting carefully and mindfully and actively the people that you sort of tolerate on that level, where your energy goes, because the fact is, where your mind goes, your energy flows, and a lot of people are aware of this, and it's just a thing to bear in mind. And in my anger journal, I noticed that a lot of my anger would come from feeling manipulated, and that's a thing that a lot of empaths have to deal with and become aware of the ways that can happen. But the fact is, we all have healthy levels of narcissism, and I think it's just really about being in touch with your inner narcissist, even if you're not. I'm not saying that when you're a narcissist it's a good thing. I'm saying that a healthy level of narcissism is healthy, and being in touch with that, especially as an empath, or someone that's encountered abuse, can be really powerful in navigating these situations, to be able to, as I say, bolster and discern from different personality types that are inevitably going to be encountered throughout life. And it's just about practice often of the neural pathways. As I said, from abuse and things like that, you do have a lack of neural pathways in certain areas, but when you process this stuff, it massively releases a lot of stress, and sort of past conditioning, immune system healing, or whatever. Sometimes it's just the smallest shift that can really just help you like blossom and really just set a lot more healthy beliefs in your mind. Because often when you have a belief about something, you'll find other beliefs to support it, but luckily when it's like based on a lie, or based on something perhaps from abuse, which wouldn't have come from you in a natural state but was programmed into you by an abuser, for example, that's, I wouldn't say easier to break down, but once it kind of makes more sense to you, even from a biological level, once you do break that stuff down, and it's a lot easier for you to then, look to yourself rather than that experience, which was, even if it went on for years and years and years, or upbringing or whatever, which has happened to a lot of people, it was another, it was an outside influence, which, though it will have affected you, there is a possibility, there's an inevitable break that you're going to have once you distance yourself and process that. That's why it's so important to keep yourself out of abusive relationships. And for anyone, just as a side note, that is dealing with abusive relationships, there's so many helplines, there's so many agencies, there's so many services that can help you with that. And I think lockdown has apparently been really massive for like domestic abuse and stuff. When these things happen, please get support and help from a friend, or don't be afraid to call police, don't be afraid to call services and blah 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 that are designed and put there to actually, help you with these situations. Therapy is great for, certain situations in relationships. Just negative, damaging relationships can just be damaging in so many ways, and it's really not worth suffering in silence. There's so many people that are on your boat, like the community on YouTube for narcissism, for example. Even though I don't know them in person, it's been so supportive and validating for me, and informative to learn about all the information on narcissism online and everything. So that's been great. Next, I want to touch on like not being afraid of like ghosting bad people, and people that like don't respect someone else that doesn't respect you. Because it's like a well-known fact within like narcissism that people who have that sort of level are looking for people to abuse. They don't really have friends. That's not really something they seek out in relationships. They like to abuse and sort of dominate, and that's kind of, especially like sociopaths and stuff. They don't really look to have friendship. They look to have someone to dominate and abuse, for example. And that goes for a lot of toxic personalities. So as a rule, it's like, don't respect people who don't respect you. I know relationships can be so complicated, especially to do with things like family, and when you're dependent on people for certain things. And I'm getting through to this as well, which is sometimes I've heard that people that have been abused, like, because they're programmed in that way, they can degrade themselves for wanting that love and validation, which I think I don't think everyone does, to be fair. I think that's a level of abuse that people have, because people that are like narcissists, for example, they're incapable of like actually maybe loving in a way that someone without narcissistic traits can, because of their inevitable various things, need to destroy relationships and destroy other people, and their lack of ability to sort of like stand as an autonomous being and kind of validate other people. They have to sort of degrade and sort of, all that stuff. And I've talked about narcissism in many videos. But when you are like, have had a long-standing relationship with a narcissist, for example, which will have been an unequally yoked relationship, because if you've by definition been abused by a person, and narcissists are abusers, you will have been in an unequally yoked relationship, which I hope that, and I believe that, given, and with my cross on, that God will save us from anyone that has dealt with that, because no one deserves to be abused at the end of the day. If you are an abuser, then you need to be treated like one. You shouldn't be, validated by the people to continue your abuse, because that's just not healthy for you nor the other person, and it's really not for the abusee to have to manage that sort of personality issue, because often toxic people just they use people to regulate their own emotion, and that's really not something that you as an autonomous being should feel obliged ever to take on, because that's not your job at the end of the day. But yeah, it's this idea of like being like, if you're starved of love, like narcissists starve people of love, right? It's a well-known fact that narcissists starve people of love, and they kind of withdraw a lot of their love to kind of want to rope someone back in. And if they're vulnerable, if they've actually experienced this for long periods of time or that sort of a situation, they, narcissists can sense this, they smell it out. And, just as you shouldn't blame yourself for abuse, that's a whole separate thing. It's important to realise when I feel like you are degrading yourself in order to get love from another person, because you can't control how you're programmed. I've talked about this so many times. You can't control how you're programmed. You can't control what you've been exposed to in the past. But often people do degrade themselves for love or what's perceived as love from another person. If you're programmed to believe one thing is love, you will instinctually and through law of attraction level gravitate towards that thing. Other people that are going to give you that thing gravitate towards you. It's an honest fact. Like, even if it's something awful, like you've gone through sexual abuse, you will attract people that sexually abuse, and you will act, not like, I wouldn't say act like you want to be sexually abused, but you might be overly provocative. There's a lot of reasons why people can be provocative after sexual abuse. Like, you can do it to feel like you're gaining control, or just like fawning from a subconscious level, trying to process that in your mind, and that's one thing that can happen. But the same goes for like any type of abuser, for example narcissistic abuse and any other type of abuse. If you are programmed to tolerate that abuse because you haven't had any other choice, for example in upbringing or in an abusive relationship, it's well known that you don't have to go through abuse and upbringing to go through an abusive relationship. People that have had healthy families can go through really unhealthy toxic relationships where you are completely abused throughout your entire relationship, and it's not something that you've been programmed through with upbringing. That can also happen too, so it's not just people that have been brought up with it at all. And even if you have healthy aspects of your family, you can experience that in relationships. But it's just so important to process your emotions and heal, which is why journaling is so important. And it can be a bit of I think you've just got to take it day by day and do this whole give us this day our daily bread kind of mindset, because you can like re-traumatize yourself. You can overexert your body. Like, your body might go into shock if you kind of overwhelm yourself with too much processing in a short time. So it's good to take it day by day, and you will heal eventually if you're going to process your emotions and you do that, which I think there is a sense of, obviously in terms of like healing the immune system and stuff, there is a sense of like putting that energy into healing to whatever extent that means. But just to finish off, to put a little bit of a biblical sense, I don't know, like, I do think that certain scripture and stuff can really reflect the way the world is at some points. So whether you're religious or not, sometimes like it's nice to learn certain things. Elevation Church is great, but I'm not going to shove religion on people. But that's kind of been nice for me, because the Bible is not, people think church people, and yeah, church people can be like a bit like, I think the myth comes from church people can be toxic, and I've experienced that, just like anyone can be. And often a lot of narcissists and stuff, they are attracted to the church because they need a saviour and they need someone to help them out, but and they need God. That's fair enough. That's kind of how it goes. But it doesn't mean that God is, and people that are narcissistic are going to be sort of can have a delusional mindset, because they're trying to validate their narcissism. But God is not delusional. God is not the church, and God is not a narcissist. So the fact is, and the Bible is not full of happy rainbows and flowers all the time. It's full of, it talks a lot about murders, rapists, prostitutes, people dying, being killed, plagues, infestations of, I'm not saying the world is all terrible. There's a lot of miracles that go on. I heard in Elevation Church that people don't notice miracles in the everyday these days. Even like the internet and phones and YouTube and everything and videos and everything that comes into our day and age is a miracle, but people don't see it as that because they take it for granted. Not to say that we should just, sit around every day trying to, like worship our laptops. I'm not saying that we should worship miracles, but but often people do take things like that for granted, and they don't I don't think we've adjusted to the new astrological era enough to really acknowledge the time we're in and its, you know, its benefits, I suppose, in that full extent to people that see it as a form of a miracle. And it is a miracle. Things like Wi-Fi and stuff, like we didn't have that 50 years ago or wherever, you know. We're really privileged in this day and age to have that as one of our accessibilities. But the last thing I'll talk about is sometimes, especially if you've been raised in religion, but most people haven't, I acknowledge that. But even as a societal mean, some people think that putting the collective first in the world, even though I think it does say, this thing about the Bible is that sometimes the scriptures, and you have to just take it in what way it works for you to some extent, and that's the honest truth. Like, you know, as I say, I've been known to do certain levels of witchcraft, and not witchcraft, but like crystals and stuff. Tarot cards, I do like it, even though it doesn't say to do it in the Bible. Whether I will get rid of that at some point, who knows? But I'm not advocating it. But you have to do what's right for you, and that's not everyone's level. But putting the collective first and worshipping the world. Also, I didn't think astrology. It says God made the universe in the Bible. Literally, there's like a verse in the creation story that says God made the universe and like the stars and the planets and everything. So I feel like astrology literally goes with that. But even though it says not to do astrology in the Bible, certain stuff contradicts itself in the Bible. Actually, no, I don't think it does, because God doesn't contradict himself. But maybe there's contradictory things in the Bible because people wrote the Bible and God didn't. Sometimes I love to just understand these levels. I don't think God contradicts himself, but sometimes maybe the Bible does, who knows. But anyway, putting the collective first is this mindset that some people can have, either in like, because they've learned it through a societal setting or whatever. It's not necessary, that's worshipping the world in my mind, and not worshipping our own, you know, it's not worshipping God, which should, in my mind, be the only thing that should be worshipped. But it's not, you know, there's so many toxic things in the world. A lot of people want to be worshipped themselves just through their own delusional mindset. You know, it's not like healthy. And most things you learn in the world are not going to serve you. They're not going to be healthy or valid. And it's really important to journal these things out, to actually realise how unhealthy it is. Because putting the collective first is not always the answer. You know, sometimes it's important to put other people first, but you really, really shouldn't put people first that haven't earned that place in your own life. You know, we all have our own lives. Lots of toxic people want to be the centre of other people's lives, which, you know, if you're in that situation, you're in that situation if you choose to be. But I would say if you're involved with a toxic person and you can't avoid them being the centre of your life, don't have them in your life. That's not a healthy, equally yoked relationship. You know, and God will give us all healing, hopefully, if asked for. It says, give it and you'll be given. So if you give that situation to God, hopefully he will heal it for you. I've seen that happen in my own life. I think I'm done talking now because I've gone on for half an hour, but thanks for listening and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.